Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Puppet Masters and Castle Freaks, the internet's leading all things Charles Band podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jared Hornbeck, coming to you, obviously, from Dante's Inferno. But I don't want you to worry because things always get weird at this time of night. They always do. Luckily, I'm not getting weird by myself. Who's with me?
Well, hi, this is Steve Guntley, and the keys are the key. That's something I don't think we could have pieced that together unless the movie spelled out. The keys are the key. This is a podcast about virtual dragons, circuit board skies, and of course, the Screamer. That's because this is a podcast all about Arcade, which is the follow-up film from the teams that brought us the original Demonic Toys and Doll Man, and a movie that Dave J describes in his book as maybe the most problematic film production in Full Moon history. We will get into that. But first, we have to announce our very exciting guest. We're so excited to have him here. He is a writer, he is a podcaster, a comedian, just all around jack of all trades and awesome guy. Jordan Morris is here with us today. Jordan, welcome.
Hey, hi, great to be
welcome.
here.
Oh, we're so excited to have you. Podcasting OG, one of the founding fathers.
yeah.
That's right, an original guy.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Up on podcast Mount Rushmore with the other greats.
Absolutely, yeah. You're just up there carving that in. We're very excited to have you here, especially to talk about the movie Arcade, which you graciously offered to take a spin of the roulette wheel on this movie and tackle a film that you had not seen before. But I wanted to ask you a little bit, what is your relationship just with horror in general and with, if you have any history of Full Moon specifically?
Sure. Yeah. With Full Moon, I mean, I am a fan, as I imagine we all are on this podcast, of the great show, The Flophouse, the great bad movie podcast, and
absolutely,
and I know
absolutely.
Castle Freak because it is such a meme on that show.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I had seen Castle Freak just because of my Flophouse fandom, and so that's the is that the big one? Is that fair to say that that's kind of their big one?
It's definitely one of the big ones. You'll be relieved to hear that we did have Stuart Wellington on the show to talk about Castle Freaks.
Okay,
but we did not let that opportunity slip by. But yeah, that's definitely up there.
It's someone who's now managed to write themselves into the lore of the film.
Yeah, in a very real way. Yeah,
talk about it. And Castle Freaks, one of the big ones. I mean, you got our bookended names. You got your Puppet Masters, and you got your Puppet Master, and you got your Castle Freak. But I also think, I mean, as far as Full Moon goes, that's a big one. And then like the Subspecies series is kind of big up there too. But yeah, I would say Castle Freak. Like if you let someone just name 5, that's going to end up in most people's top 5.
I would say so, as well as other Stuart Wellington favorite, Head of the Family, which is a wild ride. If you haven't caught that one yet either, that's a movie and a half.
No, nice. Yeah, maybe I'll do that one next. But no, I have not heard of a lot of the movies on the list, and maybe I kind of recognize some from like video store boxes, like the Puppet Master movies. I have not seen one of those, but I am aware that there's 40 of them.
There's so many. We have so many still to watch.
But I was, I was a little bit of a horror baby growing up. As a kid, I was pretty scared of them. I think I was shown Poltergeist at a sleepover too early and was very scared of Poltergeist. And remember watching it as an adult and going like, oh, I was scared by this. This is hilarious. So I was kind of a horror baby and really like. Didn't want to go see horror, in my teen years, but kind of was forced to because if you'll remember the mid to late 90s, Scream came out and was huge. And for years after that, those were like, big movies for teens to go see in social groups. And I kind of felt like, well, if I'm going to be invited to stuff and I wanted to like hang out, I should kind of get over this fear of horror movies. So I had this friend, Ryan Christian, great dude. And he, had a giant wall of horror media, VHS, DVD, etc. And he kind of like sat me down and ran me through the classics. And even like we would watch some full movies, but sometimes he would just like fast forward to like the kills and kind of explain stuff to me. So it's like, here's the thing. It stars Kurt Russell. These are Friday the 13th movies. The mom was the killer in the first one, and he didn't get the hockey mask till the third one. Kind of gave me that, very basic education. And yeah, once I kind of got over my fear, I really started to love it. And yeah, kind of in my recent life, I've actually started to write a little bit of horror, which has been really fun. Not something I ever thought I would do, but I've gotten to write some horror for comics, and it's been a blast.
Absolutely. Yeah. And you've got a new one coming out in a couple of months. Is that right?
Yes, yeah, I have a new graphic novel coming out in July. It is called Youth Group. It is a YA horror comedy. I did it with a great artist named Bowen McGurty, who maybe horror fans know their series Spectre Inspectors, another kind of a funny YA ghost story. And yeah, this is the tale of a bunch of teenage exorcists, goofy teenage exorcists. I was a part of a Bible study growing up, and always thought those were so those teen focused Bible studies. I always
very quietly menacing in their way. Yeah.
What those scamps were getting up to.
Yeah. So, in reality, it was a lot of song parodies, and then watching Back to the Future and talking about how Marty's journey is like Christ's journey. So that was actually what was going on. But our story, Youth Group, supposes, what if those goofballs actually had to do exorcisms and fight demons? So yeah, it's I think it's got, kind of I think we wanted to bring a little Shaun of the Dead energy to it, a little Buffy. So hopefully you're laughing and you're getting spooked, and you're being dazzled by the power of friendship, all in one handy book.
That sounds awesome.
Very excited for this. I was fanboying at Jordan before we started recording about his comic book Bubble, or the graphic novel, Bubble, and the podcast associated with that. They're both phenomenal. If people have not checked those out, definitely check those out. So you talked a little bit about the video store and how you would see these movies on the shelves sometimes, and that we very much had the same experience, and I think it's one of the things that make us kind of wax nostalgic a little bit about Full Moon, is just remembering seeing these boxes and always kind of being curious about what these movies were. And Arcade was definitely one of those for me, and I don't think it's coincidental that I mistook this for Tron very often. I always
I think they want that. I think they wanted that to happen.
I think they might have. I'm going to say they put their fingers on the scales a tiny bit on that one. So yeah, that was not a coincidence. And allegedly, part of the legend behind this movie is that this may have been a point of contention with Disney, which is why there are two distinct versions of this movie, which we will get into. I just want to break down. Well, first I want to ask Jared too. Have you seen this movie before, or is this a first timer for you?
So this is one of those movies where it's always brought up in conversation about Full Moon, and it's always like, oh, and there's this one when you start talking about the stuff they were churning out during the Paramount era. I had actually never seen this. I knew a lot about it though. I knew it was an Albert Pyun movie, which we'll talk about when we get into the stats. The same thing with I knew Seth Green was in the movie.
Yeah.
That really is sort of where, and I knew it was kind of a virtual reality. I kept laughing to myself as I was watching the movie for the first time, because in my head, I kept calling it the Lawnmower Boy. And thinking that was really
Lawnmower
hilarious.
Kids with a Z.
Yeah, so I knew
Lawnmower
it was VR video game stuff, but no, I had never seen this one. I mean, we had been sort of on a string of a handful in a row that were, maybe only second time watches or maybe first complete watches. I haven't seen bits and pieces, but outside of the coming attractions in other video zones, I had actually never seen this, and I don't even think I actually ever really saw clips of it.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like one I should have gotten to a lot earlier, just, being the video game obsessed kid that I was, but I was not allowed to rent R-rated movies. This has a couple of strategically placed F-bombs, and that's about all that makes this an R, really. It's I feel like I could have watched this as a kid. But now having seen this, now I question whether or not I would have liked it back then. Maybe. We'll see. Let me get into a little bit of the production of this movie, because it is pretty crazy. So Arcade came out in the United States on March 30th, 1994. It was directed by Albert Pyun and written by David S. Goyer, the highly in-demand superhero writer David S. Goyer. It stars Megan Ward, Peter Billingsley, Seth Green, AJ Langer, Sharon Farrell, Brian DeTillo, Norman Weiser, and John Delancey, Q himself. This is Albert Pyun's second project with Full Moon. It was actually technically supposed to be his first, but this film had a particularly troubled production history that saw it getting delayed about 3 years. He shot this back-to-back with his other Full Moon movie, Doll Man, which we covered a couple months ago. Fun little movie.
Oh, yeah.
So that was back in early 1991 with the intended release date of putting this out in 1992. Now, originally, this film was conceived as a much smaller horror movie. It was just going to be about a haunted video arcade. And I don't know how much mileage necessarily you could get out of that. I mean, you have to be able to walk past the whack-a-mole like a couple times and it jumps out and scares you. But I don't know how much ground you can cover with that.
Well, I can tell you, Steve, the mileage that you would get on that would be about the length of an episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark, which is essentially what this movie should be.
Right.
Yeah, this does have a little bit of those vibes, honestly.
And it is funny that you mentioned that, because now it makes more sense that the movie is called Arcade, but in the world of the movie, the game is called Arcade. It would be so confusing. It doesn't have anything to do with what the game is. So I guess it maybe knowing that fact, it would seem that they had just decided on the title Arcade. And then once the virtual reality thing came into play, with that's just what the name of the game is. Anyway, it is very weird that it is the name of the game is Arcade.
The original name of
the name of the place.
Yeah.
And the name of the game. And the name of the character inside the game.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah, I think the original name was just going to be placeholder TK. But otherwise, they filled it in. No, but this is a classic Charles Band move. It's pretty much every one of his movies starts life as a poster. He'll take it to the basement of the Cannes Film Festival where they kind of do all the sort of low budget horse trading, and whatever poster people buy, he will make that movie. He'll usually crank it out in a week or two. So they had this very sleek looking poster with science fiction dragons flying around the sky. We're like, all right, we're going to make that thing. But yeah, so Albert Pyun and screenwriter David S. Goyer wanted to do something much more ambitious than a simple haunted arcade movie. And so basically what they did is they stole a novel. There's a novel from 1984 called Arcade by Robert Max. And they basically just unofficially made a movie of that book. I don't know if there was any lawsuit or anything pending on that, but yeah, it is pretty much the same plot as that book, and they didn't give the writer any credit for that, so whoopsie. But the script that Goyer delivered originally was very similar to Tron, and it was going to be far too ambitious for the typical Full Moon budget. I think the final film came together for about $750,000, which is high for these movies.
About half of that is up on screen.
About that,
you usually hear it's all up on screen. This is
about 15%. Yeah, maybe something like that.
And it is so funny that it is stolen from a novel from the 80s, because this movie seems so 80s to me. It really does. Yeah. It has no excuse to have been made in 1994.
No way. No, I mean, you look at these graphics and you think this movie was being shot before the original Doom came out.
Right.
So this is I think it was even before the original Castle Wolfenstein. So these kind of video games weren't even really on the map, and so what they kind of came up with for a video game is just a lot of corridors with spikes sticking out of it.
Right. Some of which rotate and some of which don't.
Yeah.
And in fairness to Albert Pyun, I made a joke before about this aping the Lawnmower Man. This actually was being shot, I think, before the Lawnmower Man was released. Because it's a weird window. It's Jordan, you mentioned this looks really 80s, and this was shot in 1991 primarily, which essentially is 1980-12.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
It's still very much the 80s then, and it's funny to think of how dated already this must have looked by the time it even hit video shelves compared to what they sought out to make in the beginning. And I'll come right out and say with this one, I can appreciate that there were a lot of moving parts here. Like Charles Band wanted a haunted arcade movie. Albert Pyun thought, hey, VR is kind of in the news right now as a thing. Let's try to get some let's cash in on some of the newness of this computer animation graphics here. I feel like everyone initially had a good idea, but I think this is just a big swing and miss. Like, I just think this one is kind of a dud. And I feel bad saying that because we watch a lot of these movies and we try to really mine everything positive to say about them and keep our criticisms, although we give our sincere opinions. We don't want to shit all over the movies, but I think this is an easy one to kind of look at, and you can see really where the problems are. And I think it was just, there was a miscommunication about what this movie was supposed to be, and then the level of computer animation that they were working with very early on. By 1994, when this was coming out, I mean, everyone knew what a screensaver looked like.
Yeah. You were starting to figure that out. And I mean, Albert
like
Pyun,
Jurassic Park came out last year, and you know, listen,
right?
I don't think anyone wants this to look as good as Jurassic Park. I don't think anyone's saying that, but it doesn't have to look 1/1,000,000th as good as Jurassic Park.
Exactly. Yeah, it's so I think the screensaver comparison is exactly right. It's very flying toasters. It's very it's got that kind of aesthetic. And you know, like
video games looked better than this. Like
they kind of
Super
did.
Nintendo games looked better than this.
Absolutely, you could play
Donkey Kong
like Final
Country
Fantasy
is out at
or
this
something.
point. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, that looks great. And like, you know, and Albert Pyun, before he passed away in 2022, he gave an interview where he basically took full credit for this movie's failings. This was his final film with Charles Band. They had a pretty bad falling out on the set, and Albert Pyun basically left before finishing any of the special effects. And in the interview, he says he regrets doing that. He feels really bad leaving them holding the bag, but he didn't know how to do this. And he, you know, got into it with Charles Band, and he just like left. So the movie had to basically be reshot, rewritten, and re-edited, but with entirely new special effects in the last kind of like stretch before it was released. And they got a really weird team together to finish out the film. So the three people in charge of finishing this out were Robert Burnett, who was a PA on the set, David Schweiger, who was the producer of like the video zones that they would put at the end of all these VHS tapes, kind of like the behind the scenes making of things, and actor Peter Billingsley. Yes, that's right, Ralphie himself from The Christmas Story, the star of this movie, also worked on all the special effects and helped rewrite the script to try and salvage this movie. To be clear, he was 18 years old at the time. I don't think I could have written a better movie when I was 18 years old. I'm not dumping on him in this. I think it's valiant that he did that. But yeah, this was the first time Billingsley was kind of working behind the set, and that's kind of what he does now. So just think, if we didn't have arcade, we probably wouldn't have couples therapy.
Right.
And I think that's a real loss. That's a very real
I don't want to
loss
live
for
in that
society.
world.
He's got kind of an impressive producer's resume. I you know, scrolled around on IMDb, kind of looking at the cast. I didn't know it was the kid from Christmas Story until IMDb told me that. Kind of cool. Yeah, right. It's nice to goof on these, like, you know, bad movies when you know that everyone involved was okay. I mean, I don't know about the director. Maybe the director, you know, had a tough time, but like all of the stars, you know, Seth Green included, went on to, you know, be successful. David S. Goyer, obviously,
did great.
You know, become one of the in-demand screenwriters. So yeah, it's more fun to kind of like shit on this, knowing that like, the lead went on to be in Days of Our Lives for 2,000 episodes. She was fine.
Yeah,
so.
exactly. Yeah, most everybody involved in this movie went on to still have a career, including the director. I mean, he was a low budget kind of gun for hire before this, and that's what he was after this, you know. And he kind of kept on keeping on. But yeah, some of the other cast members worth mentioning: Megan Ward, who we talked about from the Transfer sequels. She's the girl from Encino Man and Freaked and Joe versus the Volcano. She had a really nice, or not Joe versus the Volcano, Joe's Apartment. Yeah. Jesus,
Joe's
very
Apartment.
different,
Yeah.
very different movie. Yeah, but she had a nice little early '90s run. Yeah, Peter Billingsley, of course, we talked about. Yeah, Seth Green is in here, very young Seth Green. AJ Langer from My So-Called Life and People Under the Stairs. There's a good little cast here, and of course John Delancey, who I think is like legally mandated to play kind of like slimy trickster guys. I think that's just like that's his zone, and he's so good at it.
Legally mandated to play
and I thought he was
asshole all the time.
I thought he was fun. I feel like he understood what this movie was and came in with the right energy. So I thought he was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and AJ Langer was nice to see too. I mean, I like People Under the Stairs, and also she was Rayanne on My So-Called Life, which was, if you're a person of a certain age, a really formative show. And I also really had a bit of a crush on her when I was younger because she had a spot. She was a guest on an episode of The Wonder Years. And it was one where I believe she plays a classmate of Kevin's, and it's the one where they go on a field trip to like an eclipse, like it's like to a museum where they're going to have like an eclipse room in it. I might be mixing some of those details of it up, but
that
I remember
familiar,
her from that also. And it was nice to see her here. But I want to talk about Megan Ward for a second.
Yeah,
because. So it's just weird doing this show and having recorded the episode on Transfers 2 and 3 so recently, that's still kind of fresh in my brain. You can't really hire, so she would have been about 22 at the time of filming.
Yeah.
This playing presumably like a 16-year-old in this movie.
That's pretty typical, yeah.
It's typical. It's not out of the norm to have people in their early 20s playing teenagers, but it's just so odd that only a couple of weeks ago we have Megan Ward playing the wife of Tim Thomerson.
Yeah, she's married to a man in his late 50s.
Playing a high schooler. Like, that took a lot for me to get past that. I was like, she's acting against a 50-year-old, Tim Thomerson, and he's probably not 50 in that movie, but close to it.
He's close to it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was just so weird to me. It just made her feel so kind of wrong.
There is always
through no fault of her own.
No. There's always a little bit of that disconnect, but there is one other kind of elephant in the room I want to talk about, or mouse in the room, I guess I should say. Is there's a rumor, and I've not been able to substantiate this with any kind of reliable source, but there's a rumor that this movie had to be pulled from certain markets because of a threatened lawsuit from Disney. Apparently, the sky cycles that they were using in the poster on this movie were similar to the point of being identical to the light cycles in Tron. And so this movie screened in Europe and South America before it was released here, and then it got delayed. It was supposed to come out in 1993, and it got pushed a little bit. And the version that came out here has an entirely different finale with entirely different special effects. And you can find the original footage on YouTube. Like, you can still see the original special effects, which, to be clear, are not better. They're just different. The movie doesn't make substantially more sense with the different ending on there, but it is a very different ending. And so a lot of people speculated that that's because Disney issued a cease and desist against them, and that so they had to go back and sink a little bit more money into this thing, and made it even more problematic for everybody involved. So it's out there. It's a rumor. I can't substantiate it, but that's a rumor that's been floating around. Yeah,
it's interesting for me to think that, like, that people at Disney cared enough. Like, I think that's really what it is. I mean, like, Tron, it wasn't like Tron was a competing Disney title that was coming out. It's like Tron had already been out for a decade, and it's like it had already been known as sort of like the futuristic, in the computer, live action Disney movie that I think, I mean, I can't be sure of this, but I think Tron made money. Tron came out at a weird time when Disney was really floundering.
I remember reading it lost money, but it may have. It's so hard to say with the Hollywood
I think
accounting,
in my mind, the story of Tron is that, like, bomb in the theaters, but, like, did great in cable and home video, and that's why
Mhm.
we still remember it.
And it had that incredible arcade game too, which
and it had the
really
great arcade game. Yeah,
kind
with
of
a lot
put
of-
it over the top. Yeah, that was a
Sure.
fantastic game. Yeah, but you could see them getting upset. But I agree with you. This movie seems like a little bit like it should be below their radar. But I think the fact that they put all that Tron style footage on the poster and in the original trailer, I think that's just like, all right, well, if you're gonna rub our
you're,
faces
you're
in it, I
taunting
guess we-
Disney at that point.
Yeah, you poked the bull. You poked it. I will say I was really not expecting this movie to open with a bloody suicide.
Yeah.
That took me right out of it immediately.
Yeah, it's like
um,
it has so stuff in this that is way too heavy for a haunted video game movie. It's like, oh boy, really?
Yeah, okay. We're first of all, we're front loading our heroine with a lot of trauma.
Sure.
Now, I don't know where you guys watch it. I watched this on Freevee, which was kind of the most accessible way to get it. Did you guys have like frame rate issues when watching this? Was it to me, it kind of looked like it was just like constantly queuing up an NXS video or something. Like it was just always like juddering and like,
Right.
or like a Gap commercial, something like that. I don't know. I'm not sure if it was just me and my connection or if that was just the way the copy looks.
I watched
it
also,
on. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jordan.
Oh yeah, I also watched it on Freevee, and I don't think I had like start-stop issues, but it looked like absolute shit. It like the computer graphics aside, just the scenes of people in houses looked bad.
They really did.
Yeah.
Everybody, everybody just seems to be like acting in front of a brown void. It is just like placeless. There's at some point like in the main character's house. Like her dad's a drunk, so they have this messy table, and there's a hat hanging on something, but the footage is so unclear. It just looks like the hat is floating in midair. It's I mean, maybe the original print of this movie looks amazing. We got to get it in 4K.
Atmosphere.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, this is like a Haunting of Hill House. There's just hidden ghosts throughout this entire movie, and
Right.
one of them's wearing a hat.
Okay,
He's just
yeah.
hanging out, yeah.
I watched it on the Full Moon app.
Okay.
And it didn't look. I'm not going to say that I thought there was frame rate issues. I'm going to side more with Jordan on this one. It just
Okay,
looked
fair.
bad. It looks, the aesthetic that I got from watching this movie is this: you're helping a friend clean out an attic. You come across a box with a bunch of unlabeled VHS tapes on them. You go, I wonder what are on these. And look, should have it. There's a VCR still in the house. You pop it in, and it is a taped SLP speed episode of The Secret World of Alex Mack.
Yeah, that's about
And that's
right.
this movie.
Yeah,
One of the great joys of watching a movie from this era, especially one that has video games in it.
yeah.
For me, as a 90s kid, as an arcade kid, I love pausing the movie and seeing what games are in the arcade. It's like, oh, bad dudes.
Yeah.
The resolution on this is so bad, I cannot make it out any of the games in the arcade except the Simpsons pinball machine, which is very
Oh.
prominently featured.
Okay, I didn't even make that out. I think they had a fake one called like, what was it, like Killer Cow or something?
I didn't
like
notice
that?
Killer
Yeah.
Cow. Yeah,
Killer Cow
which
looks
is such
fun.
a
Yeah.
it's such a half-assed. Like, really, you couldn't think about that for more than 4 minutes. Come up
Cow.
with something kind of funny, a parody. of an
Cowtron.
existing
I don't
game.
know. There you
Yeah,
go.
I
Like,
don't
yeah,
know.
cow the Cowminator. There we are. We're
Sure.
Yeah.
2 seconds. It's better.
Well,
Yeah.
it was hard for me to see anything specifically in Dante's Inferno itself because it was just hard to see past the hordes of like new Foot Clan recruits that were
Right.
traipsing around.
URTLE power. Yeah. No, it definitely had that kind of. Yeah. I mean, if we're being charitable, like maybe it's trying to kind of go for like a sort of a gritty MTV style approach. There are parts of this that look like a Soul Asylum video. Like you could make that argument, but I don't know that that was necessarily intentional. I do want to bring up that this film is further substantiating my kind of low simmering theory that the writers of the TV show Community were big fans of Full Moon and Empire films, because this is the second time that I feel like something is being like paid direct homage to. The arcade, the titular arcade of this game looks exactly like I think it's like a season 3 episode where they all go inside a video game and they have the little 8-bit avatars, they're all like strapped in these chairs. It looks just like it. And I don't know, maybe it's just like it's a lazy like sci-fi looking trope, but I don't know. I just feel like someone in those writers' rooms, between that and the arena similarities, I feel like someone in that writers' room was a fan. I'm going to get to the bottom of this. Yeah, it's very important. But
I mean, I love this kind of setting. I love a arcade that seems dangerous, just because like the arcades of my youth were like in mall food courts, and the idea that there were like underground arcades with skate half pipes and ninja training in them it's a really fun idea, and I don't know if they ever existed, but it's a fun little setting. But yeah, I wish this one was a little cooler.
Yeah, just a little more effort. And I mean, there was a time, I think it might have probably been before any of us were actually like old enough to go to arcades, but there was a time that arcades were kind of looked at as like the seedy part of town, like that's where people would go and like smoke and drink and get up to no good,
Sure.
And then by the early 90s, they were fairly sanitized to the point where, they were effectively babysitters for a lot of kids.
Yeah,
like
they were
but,
in a mall attached to a laser tag.
Exactly. Yeah. But yeah, there was a time when it had a little bit of that edge and dangerousness, but they already covered that perfectly well in the movie Joysticks, so we don't need to retreat that territory.
Man, how dare you evoke Great on Clark?
I haven't seen Joysticks. Sounds like a hoot.
Yeah, it's man, hey, a comedy in the 80s didn't age great.
It's got some good Joe Don Baker in it.
Okay,
we did get a little Joe Don. Yeah, Mitchell is in there. Yeah, I mean, so the basic plot of this movie is that there is a killer virtual reality arcade machine that apparently can suck kids into their virtual world, and then they basically need to go inside and save their friends by battling this arcade monster.
But not all the kids. Sometimes they just play the game, and sometimes it turns them into a weird zombie.
Yeah.
The rules of the universe very unclear. And maybe I'll give the movie a little credit. I don't know if it's trying to do this, but at some point, like someone says, arcade keeps changing the rules, and maybe that is just an excuse for like, sometimes the kids go catatonic, sometimes they get sucked in, sometimes nothing happens, sometimes they just play again. It doesn't really make any sense. So maybe that is they're out for just like, maybe the explanation is like, arcade's a fan of chaos, so you don't know what he's gonna do. But
right.
It was really really maddening. The fact it was really maddening, like not being able to like understand what was going to happen. Like if they lost, what would happen, because something different happened every time.
It's true. And I found myself, anytime they went into arcade, which is, to be clear, very little bit of this movie. Like they really kind of stretched that out.
Yeah, I know. That does prevent the movie from being more fun, because once they do get into the game, like, it's hilarious. It's campy. The graphics are bad. It's a ton of fun.
Yeah.
But, like, they spend so much time not in the video game, just like walking around, yelling at each other. It's the pre-arcade stuff in this is the pits.
It's pretty ridiculous. But like, anytime they were in arcade, I was just like, this looks terrible. I want so much more of this. This has a life to it. This has a little like a little good bad movie sort of juice.
And they kept promising us 7 levels, right? Dante's Inferno, 7 levels of hell. They keep saying the game has 7 levels. They get to the end, you don't see 7 levels. It's like they just had that Dante's Inferno thing that they wanted to do, but they don't actually deliver on it anyway.
No, they did not really follow up on that.
Well, the David S. Goyer version was supposed to be 10 levels. And he really wanted to go all out, and he wanted there to be ninjas and wanted there to be all of these really specific threats. We're just too much.
Release the Goyer cut
for this kind of budget. I mean, like we would expect no less. You know what? There's a lot of in this movie, and I want to say, like, I think this is a lower tier full moon movie. I'll come right out and say, because, like we've said with Demonic Toys,
Mhm.
the promise of the arcade really isn't lived up to enough, even within the confines of the budget and everything.
No.
They just don't go to arcade enough. And when they are having those other scenes where there's sort of the human element of it or the family element of it, it played a lot like a lot of the exposition scenes in Nightmare on Elm Street movies when the kids have to like come together and discover Freddy. And then I realized like this movie really is like a Nightmare on Elm Street movie because, well, first
Yeah.
of all, arcade likes calling people bitch,
He
Right.
sure does.
like
Yeah.
Freddy Krueger.
Yeah.
But it was really like that was the vibe I started getting from it, and I'm like, okay, I kind of understand, but there's in every Nightmare on Elm Street, there's always that kind of stretch in between some of the killings where they're being told backstory or they're going from one location to another, and it's these conversations, and I don't always mind them so much if I find the world building to be interesting, but I can
Right.
understand someone watching it to be like, when are they going to get to the fireworks factory? Like, let's
Yeah.
get there.
There's
And
a
the
moment.
This movie had so much of this. 80% of this movie was that.
Yeah.
There's a scene in this movie where, okay, one of the initial spooky things that happens is that everyone who like interacted with arcade the first time they played it,
Mhm.
their phone is busy. And so they go down their friends list and call everyone, and when they call the person, their phone is busy. And then the main character's like, call this person and their phone's busy. Call this person and their phone's busy. It made me feel insane.
Yeah.
It's like it's like you're just killing time. You're just trying to like eke this thing over theatrical length. Yeah, like she could say, I called all our friends and all their phones are busy at the same time. Something weird is
Done.
going on. But they just sit in his room and randomly call people with a locked off camera shot, and it's busy and they don't really react to it. It is, yeah, it made me feel insane.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's just so much of that, you know.
Now
And
call Sharon. Now call Kenny. Now call Davey. Yeah, and it's
Jordan,
anyway.
you're totally right. But I will say one thing that was detrimental to the plot, and I'm really glad that it didn't end up on the cutting room floor. I want to know how Peter Billingsley feels about motorboating.
oh god.
But I
Oh
miss
yeah,
that.
isn't that little? Is there that's like this weird little tossed off line where it's like
It's so strange.
it's
like,
clearly like it's one of those shots where it's like, all right, we're just gonna have you guys like moving your mouths in the back, you know. But they rolled sound on whatever improv they were doing. So what did he say? He said something like, "Oh, did you get to see her boobs? Did you get to go or something?" He says
Oh,
something
I
really
remember
weird
this.
like that.
Yeah. Yes.
he's like,
okay.
well, it's like Seth Green has his back to him and he's got his hands up in the air and he's like, oh, I went out with a girl the other night, you know, the girl with the big and then he says nothing, and then Peter Billingsley's like, oh yeah, really? Like, what was it like? Did you get to touch him? He's like, oh yeah, I put my hands on him and I squeezed him. And then Peter Billingsley is like, oh, did you do this? And he does like the motorboat face, and I'm just like, why is this in this movie?
Yeah, this was one of a couple moments, and they usually involved Seth Green, where
Yeah.
it's that thing you said. It's like they're like, we're coming in the middle of the scene. You guys are talking about something. Just talk about whatever. And it's just like, okay, you just gave a shitty 16-year-old permission to do improv. That's
Yeah.
what they're gonna come up with.
Yep.
There's one that really stuck in my head. So at the arcade, the first friend disappears. I don't forget that guy's name, Alex or something.
I
like
totally
that.
forget the names. Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. Look up. Alex disappears. Alex does arcade and disappears.
Yeah.
His friend does it before him, and he doesn't disappear, but Alex does. Who knows? Whatever. And so they're like, "Where's Alex? Where's Alex?" And they're clearly they're riffing. And Seth Green says, "He probably went outside. You know, when he gets bored, he goes outside." Like that.
That's called
something
character development.
That's called something he noticed about his friend. Well, my friend always goes outside when he gets bored. He just wanders outside.
He's one of my few friends without agoraphobia. We have a very exclusive
Right?
club.
Yeah. He
And
loves the
they're
outdoors.
that's why their phones are so busy, you know?
He's the-
Jeez,
he's the
that's
first-
their connection.
Right. He's the first person to ever touch grass. You know.
I mean, yeah, there's just so much filler going on in between here. In the meantime, we get to kind of spend some time with these characters. And I don't want to, I never like bad mouthing actors, because they're just kind of doing what they're told and they're doing the best that they can with the material here. But there's a very flat affect.
Probably getting one take of everything.
One take of everything. I don't think they're being given any kind of character motivations. Everybody's got this very flat affect. And like, I have to say, I feel like Peter Billingsley is miscast here because maybe it's just the Ralphie connection, but I just don't buy him as like the alpha of this group of troubled kids.
Yeah.
He's just too baby face. He's too, cherubic and kind of sweetly nerdy. And it's not like he's dressing up like a cool kid or anything either. He's still wearing like the sweaters with like the dress shirt coming out for the time. Like
he has sunglasses on, sir.
Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry.
A lot of cool teen sunglasses in this movie.
Oh, I take it back. I'm worried now.
Miscast. I don't think that I don't know necessarily that I'm going to say that his performance is bad necessarily.
No.
He's miscast. And I actually don't think the cast is really the problem with this movie. I think Megan Ward is fine. I think Seth Green is fine. And AJ Langer, what you're asking of them, they're all fine and they're amiable enough. And I don't hate spending time with them. And and the one who the zero charisma though, who's zapped into arcade was Greg. Greg was the first one.
Okay, Greg.
Oh, okay, yeah.
He is kind of a nothing character too, but I really don't. It's not necessarily the cast. Like there's a couple. I think you can look at these people work, and it kind of makes sense that they would, go on to be reasonably successful. I think they're fine, and I even think like John Delancey, he's having a little bit of fun when he's on screen.
Yeah.
I don't know the name of the programmer, the actor who plays the programmer, but he brought a really weird nervous energy to that role, which I appreciated too. There's just something, like you said, there's a flatness to the way, and I don't know if it was a mix of the way the actors were directed to sort of give some of the real life scenes like a dreamlike quality, but everyone sort of seems like they're on Ambien.
Yeah, it's very subdued. I do want to shout out. Yeah, I agree that the programmer is, given a little juice here. He's a German actor named Norbert Weiser, and he did 2 films in 1993. One of them was Arcade, and the other one was Schindler's List. So
wow,
that's quite a year. For this dude. That's quite a year of let's say mild ups and downs. Yeah.
I'll shout out the guy when they go to the video game studio who just lets them walk in, by the way, and give notes on the game. Just imagine
video game developers love that, by the way. Walk up, tell them exactly how Warcraft should play.
Imagine if Ubisoft just let people come in and talk and say what they wanted to be in Assassin's Creed. It's so insane. So they just walk into this video game studio, and there's a guy who the receptionist is played by this dude who is such a hunk. This receptionist is like this gorgeous male model. It's wild. And he has one scene. So it's like, find me the most handsome man you can to play the receptionist.
Wasted. Yeah, absolutely. He could have been the titular Arcade. Like I feel like that would have been a direction to go instead of relying entirely on like CGI created worlds, which A, they would never, like, the technology in general wasn't there yet, and B, the budget for this movie definitely wasn't there for that. So like, they couldn't really pull it off. Just do kind of like a David Cronenberg Existenz style where like, just tell us this is a virtual world, have a bunch of actors behaving like video game characters. It will still look hokey, but it won't look like this painfully shitty, and you won't need to like pad out the story so much to work around like the 5 minutes of CGI you were able to cobble together. I would have preferred that. And instead, like, the personification of Arcade in this is sort of indistinct. He kind of looks like a Power Ranger, like when they turn into big robots, but like
he's like a steel lion, like a lion made of wires and stuff.
Yeah, he's kind of a lion. He's kind of a dragon. Like you can't really. And sometimes, like I was thinking, I was looking at his mouth, and then I realized they pulled out. I'm just like, I'm looking at some random part of his face. I'm just like, this isn't really coming together visually for me. They did have the voice of Jonathan Fuller, aka the titular Castle Freak, was the voice of Arcade. So
that's fun.
I can appreciate that. They
And that
brought
was a
in
thing
somebody
that was
cool.
done after the fact too, right?
Almost
I
certainly.
think
Yeah.
the Jonathan Fuller voice he was part of that little motley crew that were trying to fix the movie up after Albert Pyun left.
And he was smart because he set up his contract so that he gets paid every time he says "kiss your reality goodbye." So he did pretty well off of this movie.
Right.
Like he made it happen. Yeah, I mean, so it just takes so entirely long for like most of the kids just get absorbed like off script. Maybe I looked away. Did we see like Seth Green get like absorbed into the game at any point?
We
I don't
didn't.
think-
Yeah,
yeah.
I think the idea is that they play arcade at the arcade, but everybody
Yeah.
goes home with like a home version, like a home, VR setup with the gloves and the goggles. So I think
It's just called home there. Yeah. If you take it to a McDonald's, it's called a McDonald's.
right. Yes, the game is where you're playing the game. So yes, later we see Seth Green as one of the like ferrymen who says the labyrinth problem at them.
That was so bizarre. I mean, and this scene at the end when they're actually exploring like the realms of arcade is when the movie is at its most fun. Like
yeah, that's it's a blast.
It is also at its most inept, but it is so fun watching it. Okay, because we get like this steel dragon thing that's like flying through the sky, and it looks like something like a first season of Cartoon Network's reboot or something, like some like really primordial looking CGI, and the rest is just like that Simpsons episode where Homer gets in 3D and like it's just a bunch of fractal shapes because that's all they could afford. Like that's kind of what we're working with. It's a Trapper Keeper universe. That's what this is. This whole thing looks like an early 90s Trapper Keeper. That's the aesthetic they landed on. But they are going for some surreal touches. Like you said, like we see one of their friends like crawl out of a purple puddle and like what is he gives her like a ball of energy, and then he's like, oh, take this. He says it like a zombie.
I think it's one of the keys. I think it's one of the like green keys that they need.
Anyway. Which are key. Yeah, they definitely are key. Yes.
As we learned. The weirdo programmer.
Yeah, and then you get this weird like River Styx kind of puzzle moment with Seth Green and the other kid where they're just like, one of us always tells the truth and one of us always lies, and it's just like, what the hell movie are we watching? Yeah. I don't know what the stakes are at this point. Like, I don't know if you established like, I guess they said we need to beat the game. We need to get through the 7 levels of the game in order to save our friends. We see maybe 2 levels of this. Like there's like a little pyramid for like visual reference where we show that they're like moving up a level, but we don't see all these different levels. They are not horribly distinct.
So what are the levels? Can we name them? So the first level is the corridor that they skateboard through.
Yes.
Probably because they can't be walking in front of the green screen. They probably have to stand still and the world moves around them. They probably can't move that much.
And that's the hilarious part. They are still moving like they're running. Like
but apparently they're on a skateboard.
There's some real conflicting direction here.
So let's call the pyramid world the second level, where she meets her friend in the goo. And then they go to the River Styx.
Right.
And then the light cycles.
Yeah, light cycles are very brief. Yeah, they hop into these kind of weird misshapen spaceships and run through like a Star Fox level.
Yeah, that looks very Star Fox. And then let's be generous and call Arcade's Lair the final level. So that's fine. If we're missing 2, we're missing 2 levels by my count.
Yeah. I don't know if
not too bad.
Yeah. I mean, it feels like, but again, that's being very generous because a lot of these worlds are just kind of blending together, and but again, this is where you can at least like get a giggle out of this movie, and like this is where you can have like the most fun with it when it's being
one of the levels
really silly and really dated
3D version of the cover of the Yes album Drama.
Sure. I'll take your word on that.
For all 2 of you who know what that album cover looks like, the rest of you, Google it. You'll see what I mean.
I think there's probably an overlap with this podcast and Yes fans.
I would hope so.
I haven't listened to every episode, but this is a wild guess.
I would hope so. But of course, the big revelation at the end of the movie is that this machine, much like Dr. Venture's machine in his lab, is powered by a little orphan boy. It just
Right,
killed an
yeah.
orphan and just stuck an orphan in there.
That that's pretty brutal. They're like, oh, he's a boy whose mom hit him too much and he didn't wake up. It's like phrased in the most upsetting way and just such a anyway.
Yeah.
How about a serial killer? Put a serial killer in there. Doesn't that make a little more sense? Maybe it's done to death, but like
Yeah.
abused boy, it just like it throws this like heavy shit on this movie that should be pure fun. And then you're like, "Ah, don't make me think about child abuse movie."
Yeah.
Well,
And plus,
you're
this little boy
absolutely
is
right,
not like
Jordan. This
what's
movie is too serious in a lot of those ways. Like
Sure.
we covered a movie months back called Shrunken Heads. And
Mhm.
Shrunken Heads is a movie that stars primarily younger actors in the leads, and it really plays like a dark comedy. And when it goes dark, it still remains a dark comedy. Like tonally, it pulls some audacious things, but it all makes sense within the movie. So you're watching it being like, oh my God, I can't believe they went there, but it makes sense. In this movie, like the really like maudlin beats that happen in the domestic part of it, like don't fit tonally with the, because I feel like if you're going to have the graphics or the computer effects of this thing needs to be inherently goofier in tone
yeah.
to match, what you're seeing on screen. I did appreciate though that the suicidal mom, is the mom in Night of the Comet, which is one of my favorite movies.
Oh, okay.
So that it was nice to see her pop in there, but her whole storyline as well, and then having the scene where she says like, "Oh, I had a dream that you were dead," and she's like, "Well, I am dead," and then shoots herself in the head again in front of her daughter. I'm like, this
It's like,
is
wait, so are
just-
you dead or are you killing yourself? Like,
Yeah,
what-
not only
Yeah.
is it
Yeah.
narratively confusing, but tonally, it just feels so wrong. Like,
Yeah.
if you're gonna cut to those computer effects, this thing needs to be light in tone, and it
And again,
tries to pull something off that's not really equipped to do.
But again, a serial killer would make sense of why he's being so malicious and like power hungry or
Yeah.
something, like a little abused child does not immediately make I don't want to turn on that kid. I don't want that
Sure.
kid to be that heavy. I want to give that kid a blanket, like that's horrible. I don't want to think about it like that. And so it just never ties together. And I think it's just maybe creepy kids were just in vogue at the time. I don't know. The Good Son had just come out. We had creepy kid fever, but we just had
Well,
to
the
sneak
creepy
something
kid
like that in there.
segment in Demonic Toys works better than
It
this.
does.
The creepy
Yeah.
dream stuff with the two kids in Demonic Toys, I think, in hindsight, works a lot better than this.
Yeah, no, I think so too. Because that movie went much more intentionally dreamlike. Like it was clearly it was making it like very surreal and
Yeah.
making it very eerie in that way. And this movie just feels like it's just a last minute addition. It's just like, oh, what's the shocking twist? At the end, at the heart of Arcade. It's it's a little boy. And it didn't work. And then it really didn't work that we have the reveal at the end that they got to bring it back into the real world, because that's just like that just raises further questions. Like you
Right.
spent the whole movie like explaining all the mechanics of this, and then you just sort of throw all that away.
After they get out, the main character, unprompted, just says like, "So do you think Arcade got out into the real world?" Like, if
What
you
would
don't
make you
have,
think that,
like,
Gary?
you don't have to call all your friends to so we can hear the busy signal. Just have the creepy kid show up at the end, and we will assume that Arcade got out into the real world. Just this, like, well, we all got saved, but do you think it got out into the real world?
Whoops, oops. I guess we
Yeah.
didn't think that could happen, but maybe if they called all their friends and asked them each individually if they thought Arcade
Hey,
got
do you
out
think
into the real
Arcade would
world.
get out? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, bye. I'm gonna
Runtime
call
this movie up
Jeff.
to 95 minutes.
Yeah. I did get alarmed because of the I think with Freebie with the ads, it came out to like $1.40 or something like that. I'm like, oh man, this feels interminable for a full. The cool thing, Jordan, about doing this show is that most of these movies are 80 minutes flat, if not shorter. So it's pretty easy to knock them out. And even if they're kind of like a bummer to watch, like it's going to be over pretty quickly, you know, like you're not going to be investing too much of your day in this. But yeah, this one with the ads was kind of stretching out to like 100 minutes is not a long movie, but it's a very long full moon movie.
Yeah, right. Especially if you have to watch the same super loud car insurance commercial 5 times.
Yes. Oh God, that always that always drives me nuts, especially like if I'm watching like a really heavy horror film. I was watching this French movie from 2007. It's like a famously disturbing, gory French movie called Inside.
Mhm.
And every time it's like, okay, here's a crazy woman torturing a pregnant lady with scissors, and now we cut to an Aflac commercial, and we have to hear Gilbert.
It's Lily
Gottfried's-
from AT&T. She's
Yeah,
fun.
so
like, okay,
all of a
what's-
sudden you're like, it cuts and you hear the general theme song.
Yeah. It is
whiplash,
like
whiplash.
it is like if you are a fan of like this kind of movie and like more obscure things and more underground things, like these things live on those free with ads platforms.
Yeah.
I'm like glad they're around because like
Yes.
Netflix would never have this thing. That's this is why you need the Plutos and the Tubies of the world is for stuff like this. But
Absolutely.
that is such an intrusive way to watch a movie with those like random ads. It's very assaultive.
It is.
Wait, long one at the beginning, long one at the end. I don't know, Tubi. I'm not telling you how to run your business, but
Yeah, it's even when you were watching like TV shows, when you're like, if you're watching a movie on TV, like on syndication, and they would break it up with commercials, you were getting different commercials. You weren't just getting the
Sure.
same 3.
Yeah.
So it's like you could hope to see the weird Energizer Bunny one or something. But yeah, you don't really get that here. Just lots of insurance and medications that I'm never going to take. But hey,
I'm glad to see that it's not only me, and it's
Oh,
not
yeah.
something with my algorithm why I'm getting these certain ads.
Yeah. I mean, it is what it is. And yeah, I agree. I am glad that movies like this can still be found, even if this one didn't really work for me. Like, I still am happy that they exist, and this is very more than a lot of movies we've talked about. This one's a time capsule of a not necessarily a specific 90s mood, because that would be giving this a lot more credit to say that they had a control over their tone. But in terms of fashion, in terms of CG, and in terms of plotting and storytelling, and kind of this insistence on making these blockbustery type movies, or these like genre movies, very deadly serious, I feel like it's very indicative of this particular time in film history. So if nothing else, it's worth watching for that kind of energy to it. But yeah, I did find myself pretty disappointed by this one, especially for Full Moon of this era. It's kind of hard to miss, and this one just really feels like simultaneously too many cooks and no cooks. There's nobody in charge of this thing.
Sure. Let the janitor try to cook the meal. I don't know.
Maybe
Yeah,
put this
this-
rat in your
Get a
hat, see
bus
what
driver
happens.
in here.
Yeah, why
It's
not?
weird that this movie came out in the Paramount era, because it doesn't
Yeah.
feel like it. It really feels like there's, we've been doing the show long enough now where we can notice differences between the classic Paramount era and then when it went to the Kushner Lock and
Yeah,
the stuff that they started putting out. I mean, there was still some stuff of quality during that time, but there was kind of a noticeable drop, and obviously a noticeable lack of comparative funds when you don't have that Paramount money behind you. But this one really struck me as being that way. And I want to just say, like, I think this is objectively a pretty bad movie,
yeah.
but I will say I don't begrudge someone to have a nostalgic relationship with this movie.
No.
Like, I think sometimes about things that I watched when I was younger and at formative years that I'll defend, or they'll be on, or I'll see that someone put it on YouTube, or it shows up in streaming, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna put this on because it's familiar. I'm gonna watch a couple episodes of whatever it might be, some terrible Hanna-Barbera cartoons from Cartoon Express or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
And I'll watch it and I'll be like, it will make me feel a certain way because I have that connection to it. But I can separate myself from it and recognize, like, this is objectively not particularly good entertainment. And
No.
I feel that way about this movie. I think they tried something they took some big swings. I've defended Albert Pyun a lot. I know people
Yeah.
have really have said some terrible things about him as a director, but he's just operating in terrain that he's not familiar with here. Like, this is the guy with like sword and sorcery or kickboxing cyborg movie,
Yeah.
that he should be doing that. And he just seems like the wrong fit for this kind of project and in over his head. So I'm not too surprised that when it was starting to turn into an unmitigated disaster that he just up and left. Because
it really was just like
not the
all right,
right
bye.
fit for it. So if you're a fan of arcade and you saw this movie when you were 12 years old and you thought that the VR was super cool, like, I hope that you revisit it and enjoy it. I just think it's one of those times where a low budget studio tried to be ambitious with some technology and things with which it wasn't too familiar or ready to work in, and you get this sort of real mess where just a lot of different moving parts had to fail at the same time for it to come out like this. I almost asked this, which I never really asked before about any of these movies, and I'm just curious, do you think, like, originally where Albert Pyun had this movie, they were really worried about it, and obviously, reshot a bunch of parts, redid the special effects, revoiced the monster, did a bunch of ADR. Should this have been released?
I mean, after a certain point, you're probably just operating at a loss, right? And so you spend $750,000 on it. You have to imagine a blockbuster in 1994. You could probably recoup that, like if a bunch of weird kids like us who just kind of like, we're gonna seek out something kind of oddball. I'm willing to bet they probably recouped their money. Yeah, or I don't know, maybe not, but it probably was worth it to get it out there. But I think the low quality of this one and a couple of other films that came out around this time sort of led to Paramount souring on Full Moon, and like they would cancel the contract with the company like the year after this, and they would have to kind of find other funding. So I think strategically it may not have been the way to go, but once again, Charles Band is always like a little ahead of the curve, like just too ahead and too ambitious for what he's trying to do. But I had a decent enough time. I think there's some really fun, goofy CGI, and definitely check out the alternate CGI on YouTube if you're curious, if you want to see how this movie could have been. But I think that that takes us to the final boss of Arcade. I think we've defeated it. I think we've chased the screamer away, and
we threw our weird electronic brain with wires coming out of it at his face, and it killed him for some reason.
That's all we need. A reason happened. Yeah, exactly. But thank you so much again, Jordan, for being here and for talking about this goofy movie with us. We had
thank you.
We had a great time having you on.
Tons of fun. Thank you.
So tell us again where people can find your upcoming graphic novel and anything else that you've got going on. You've got so much going on.
Yeah, no, nice of you to say. I got a lot of errands to run tomorrow. I got to pick up a prescription.
Yeah, somebody act as his Postmates.
Yeah. Youth Group, the graphic novel I mentioned at the top of the show, the YA horror comedy featuring art by Bowen McGurty. You can pre-order that now. You can do that at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org, anywhere you get a book. So your local indie bookstore would be glad to pre-order you up a copy. If you want to go to bit.ly/youthgroupbook, bit.ly/youthgroupbook, you can see the cover, you can see some of the art, and get all those pre-order links. And if folks don't know, I sure didn't know this going into book writing, but pre-orders are weirdly important to books. So if it sounds cool, if you have authors you follow and you like their stuff and want to support them, a pre-order goes a long way. So one more time, bit.ly/youthgroupbook.
Absolutely. I cannot wait for that. We're going to have the link in our show notes as well. So people can definitely check that out immediately. I highly recommend checking out Jordan's writing, your podcast, Jordan Jesse Go. Amazing. One of the foundational podcasts out there. And you're all around, and it's great that we can find so much of your stuff. Jared, where can people find our stuff?
Well, if you like what we do, you can jump onto Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leave a 5-star rating and maybe a brief review if you feel so inclined. You can follow the show on social media at on Instagram at puppetmasters_castle freaks. You can follow me at _giallo_jerry or Steve at Minotaur Matador. You can also find the show on any other social media, X, Blue Sky, Threads, YouTube, anywhere. If you just search the name of the show, you will find a way to listen to it and be up on all the content that we're bringing to you. We are not the only content, though, that Steve's bringing to you. So I think, Steve, you should tell the listeners where else they can hear you and then give them a little preview of what we've got coming up next week.
Oh, most certainly. Well, you can find my other podcast. It's called Cinema Arcade. That's cinema and arcade mashed together because that's what we do. We watch a movie, we play the video game based off of it, and then we contrast, compare, see how they complement or detract from each other. We're having a lot of fun doing that. I'm literally going to get off this call and go record an episode on Cutthroat Island. So that is going to be a lot of fun.
Nice.
That's one of the biggest box office failures of all time. And unlike arcade, you can actually see that money on the screen for Cutthroat Island. I will say that much. And then be sure to tune in next week because we've got a very fun one coming up for you. We are going to be talking about the 1986 Empire film's Terror Vision, directed by the great Ted Nicolau.
Oh, yeah.
A wacky suburban America satire with one of the goofiest looking aliens of all time. Very excited to talk about that one. We got a great guest joining us as well, and we can't wait. So thank you, everybody, again. Thank you, Jordan Morris, for being the best, for being on the show. And we will see you all next time. Well, I'm just going to put my quarters up here and just make sure that, that people can listen to this podcast eventually.